Hello, everyone, and welcome to Seven Continents, One Story.
Hi there. So glad you're joining us today.
Hey everyone, great to have you here.
I'm Niels, professor of history from Sweden.
I'm Celine, joining you from Edinburgh, Scotland.
And I'm Ethan, calling in from Malta.
Together, we explore incredible stories from history across all 7 continents.
Every episode brings you a new journey through time.
From ancient civilizations to modern moments that changed everything.
So let's begin.
Right. Nils, I have a question for you.
Go ahead, Celine. I'm listening.
What if I told you there's an object that's over 5,000 years old, never been allowed to leave its country, and is considered the first historical document ever created?
Wait, that sounds so cool. What is it?
You know, Celine, you're very good at these mysteries. Where is this object?
Egypt, and it's been sitting in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo since it was discovered in 1898.
Oh, I think I know what you're describing. And if it's what I think it is, this is one of the most important artifacts in human history.
Okay, now you have to tell us.
Patience, Ethan. Let me see if Celine can stump me with more clues.
All right, listen carefully. This object is made of smooth gray-green stone. It's about the size of a shield, carved on both sides with incredible detail, and it shows a king wearing 2 different crowns.
Excellent description, Celine.
Wait, why would a king wear 2 different crowns?
That, Ethan, is exactly the right question. And the answer takes us back over 5,000 years, to a moment that changed history forever. Let me take you there. The year is 3100 before Common Era. That's over 5,000 years ago. You're standing on the banks of the Nile River in Africa. The sun is rising over the delta. You can feel the heat already building. You can smell the rich, dark soil left by the annual floods. Around you stretches the most fertile land on Earth. But this land is divided. 2 kingdoms, 2 peoples, 2 crowns. Upper Egypt in the south, following the river valley. Lower Egypt in the north, spreading across the delta. For generations, they've remained separate, competing, sometimes fighting, sometimes trading, but always separate. Until one man decided to change everything. A king named Narmer. And what he's about to do will create one of the longest-lasting civilizations in human history. To understand this moment, we need to understand the world in 3100 BCE. The Bronze Age was beginning. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians were building the first cities. In Europe, stone circles were being raised. But in the Nile Valley, something extraordinary was happening.
Hold on, Niels, can you explain what you mean by Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt? That's always confused me.
Perfect question, Ethan. It confused me too when I first learned about this. Upper Egypt is actually in the south, following the river upstream. Lower Egypt is in the north, where the Nile spreads into the delta. The names come from the river's flow, not from how we look at maps today.
It's a bit like how we think of rivers. The source is up the river, even if it's geographically south.
Exactly, Celine. Now, these 2 regions were very different. Upper Egypt was a narrow ribbon of green cutting through the desert, a linear settlement pattern. Communities stretched along the river like beads on a string. The people there developed a distinct culture. We call it Nakada culture, archaeologically. They made distinctive pottery. They buried their dead in particular ways, and they were becoming increasingly organized, more hierarchical, more ambitious.
And Lower Egypt?
The delta was completely different. Multiple river branches creating a broad, marshy region. Rich in resources, fish, fowl, papyrus thickets, different ways of living, different connections to the outside world, trade routes to the Levant and beyond.
So they were basically 2 different countries?
2 different kingdoms, yes. Each with their own power centers, their own leaders, their own traditions.
That sounds like it could lead to conflict.
It did, But it also led to something remarkable. Now, Narmer didn't achieve unification alone. He had generals, of course, soldiers, priests to legitimize his authority, but he also had something crucial: administrative talent. People who could actually make a unified kingdom work. Officials from both Upper and Lower Egypt who understood how to bridge two very different worlds. One of the keys to Narmer's success was incorporating Lower Egyptian officials into his new administration. People who knew how the Delta worked, who understood its people, who could help create systems that would last.
So this wasn't just military conquest?
Excellent observation, Celine. No, it wasn't. Let me explain.
Okay, I'm a bit lost. Why did Narmer want to unite these two kingdoms in the first place? What was in it for him?
Brilliant question. Several things. First, resources. The Delta had access to Mediterranean trade. The South had access to Nubia and Africa's interior. Together, they controlled the entire Nile Valley. Second, defense. A unified kingdom could resist outside threats more effectively than divided regions. And third, legitimacy. Becoming the king who united the two lands would make you the most powerful ruler in the known world.
The whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Precisely.
I was reading about this last week in the library, and something struck me about the process. This wasn't a sudden conquest. It took decades, maybe even generations of rulers before Narmer finally completed it.
Yes. Tell them what you found.
There were rulers before Narmer. We find their tombs. We see increasingly elaborate burials, increasing wealth. Someone even called Scorpion King appears in the archaeological record. He may have started the unification process that Narmer completed.
Wait, there was actually a Scorpion King, like in the movie?
The movie took inspiration from reality, Ethan, though the real Scorpion King probably looked quite different from the film version.
What fascinated me was that we can see the groundwork being laid. Longer trade networks, more complex administration. It's like watching a state being built, layer by layer.
Remember Celine's mysterious object? Here's your second clue. This artifact shows a king performing rituals, defeating enemies. And here's the fascinating part. On one side, he wears the white crown of Upper Egypt. On the other side, the red crown of Lower Egypt. And it contains some of the earliest writing ever discovered. When I saw the original in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, I stood there for almost an hour, just looking at this window into humanity's earliest recorded history.
That's so cool. What kind of writing?
Hieroglyphs, Ethan. Some of the very first hieroglyphic inscriptions, not fully developed yet, still transitioning from picture symbols to phonetic writing, but undeniably writing, undeniably history being recorded.
The birth of written history.
Exactly that. By 3150 BCE, Upper Egypt was consolidating under increasingly powerful rulers. The major power centers were Hierakonpolis in the far south and Abydos in the central region. Narmer emerged from this world. We're not entirely certain of his origins. Some evidence suggests Hierakonpolis. Other evidence points to Abydos. But what we know for certain is that by 3150 BCE, he had achieved dominance in Upper Egypt.
How? How did he become the most powerful?
We can only piece together fragments. Archaeological evidence suggests a combination of military success, strategic marriages, and religious legitimation. The rulers of this period claimed divine authority. They associated themselves with Horus, the falcon god.
So it wasn't just about being the best warrior. It was about convincing people you had divine right to rule.
Exactly, Celine. Political power and religious authority were inseparable. Once Narmer controlled Upper Egypt, he turned his attention north, to the Delta, to Lower Egypt. Now this is where it gets interesting. For generations, historians assumed this was purely military conquest. Narmer as warrior king, crushing his enemies. But the archaeological evidence tells a more complex story.
What kind of story?
A story of military campaigns, yes, but also diplomacy, alliance, negotiation. The unification wasn't accomplished in a single great battle. It was a process, a transformation.
How do we know that?
Several ways. First, we find Lower Egyptian pottery styles continuing after unification. Their artistic traditions don't disappear. Second, we see administrative titles from both regions in the new unified system. And third, the capital itself tells us something important. Narmer had a crucial decision to make. Where should the capital of this new unified kingdom be?
This seems like it could make or break the whole enterprise.
Yeah, because if you pick the wrong place, people are going to be upset, right?
Absolutely. This was a decision with enormous consequences. Think about Narmer's position. He's from Upper Egypt. His power base is in the south. The obvious choice would be to rule from Hierakonpolis or Abydos, places of traditional Upper Egyptian power. But if he does that, how do the Lower Egyptians feel? Like a conquered people, like their kingdom was simply absorbed by the south.
But if he moves the capital to the delta, to somewhere like Buto,
His own people in Upper Egypt might feel betrayed.
You're both seeing the dilemma perfectly. Let me paint you a picture of Lower Egypt as Narmer approached. The delta was wealthy, populous, connected to the Mediterranean world. They had their own strong traditions, their own gods, their own way of doing things, and they were proud. Some Lower Egyptian leaders certainly resisted. We have evidence of fortifications, of conflict, but we also have evidence of something else.
what?
Cooperation, integration, Lower Egyptian officials working within Narmer's administration, Lower Egyptian artistic styles being incorporated into the new unified culture. This wasn't just conquest and submission. This was something more sophisticated, more pragmatic. Imagine you're a senior official in Buto, the Lower Egyptian capital. You've spent your life serving the Red Crown, managing trade, overseeing agriculture, keeping records. Now, Narmer's armies are approaching. You have a choice. You could fight, resist, try to preserve Lower Egypt's independence. Many did. Some of those battles are depicted on ceremonial objects we've found. Or you could recognize that Narmer is going to win, that the question isn't whether Egypt will be unified, but how. And you could choose to help shape that unification, to ensure Lower Egypt's traditions and interests are protected in the new order.
That's a really hard choice.
It's not just about survival. It's about preserving your culture while accepting political reality.
Yes, and several Lower Egyptian officials made that choice. We know because we find their titles and names in the administrative records of unified Egypt. They helped build the systems that would make this new kingdom work. Now remember our mysterious artifact? Here's your final clue. This object wasn't just created to be beautiful, though it is. It wasn't just created to record history, though it does. It was created to announce to the gods and to all people that two kingdoms had become one. This is the Narmer palette, the most important piece of evidence we have for the unification of Egypt.
The Narmer palette. I've read about this. It's extraordinary.
It's a shield-shaped piece of siltstone, carved on both sides. On one side, Narmer wears the white crown of Upper Egypt, smiting an enemy. On the other, he wears the red crown of Lower Egypt, inspecting the bodies of his defeated foes. It's propaganda, yes. It's royal glorification, absolutely. But it's humanity's first attempt to record and commemorate a historical event in visual form.
And it's 5,000 years old?
Over 5,000 years old, carved around 3100 BCE. When I visited the Egyptian Museum and saw it in person, I've dedicated my life to studying ancient civilizations. But standing in front of the Narmer palette, seeing those hieroglyphs, those images, It's like touching the very beginning of recorded history.
What else does it show, besides Narmer wearing both crowns?
So much. It shows the artistic conventions that would define Egyptian art for the next 3,000 years, the way figures are represented, the use of different-sized figures to show importance, the organization in horizontal registers. It shows religious symbolism. Horus, the falcon god, appears. There are images of bulls knocking down city walls, serpent creatures with intertwined necks, and crucially, it shows both military conquest and ceremonial unity. It's telling multiple stories at once.
So this one object is like a window into how Egypt was created?
Perfect way to put it, Ethan. A window into the birth of one of history's greatest civilizations. The unification took time, probably 15 to 50 years of active campaigning and consolidation. It wasn't a single battle. It was a transformation of an entire society. Narmer had to accomplish several things simultaneously: militarily defeat or diplomatically incorporate Lower Egyptian power centers, establish a unified administrative system, create symbols and rituals that both regions could accept, and most crucially, choose where to place the capital.
So where did he choose?
Somewhere brilliant, somewhere that shows real political intelligence, not in the heartland of Upper Egypt, not in the center of Lower Egypt, but right at the border between them, a new city. Memphis.
So Narmer has united the two kingdoms, militarily, politically, religiously, but now comes the moment that will determine whether this unity lasts or fractures. Where to establish the capital?
Okay, seriously think about this for a moment. If you were Narmer, what would you do?
You have three realistic choices. First, you could establish the capital in Upper Egypt, in Hieroglyphs or Abydos, your traditional power base, where your ancestors are buried, where your supporters expect you to rule from. Second, you could establish the capital in Lower Egypt, in Budo or another delta city. Show the conquered northerners that they're equal partners. Make a dramatic gesture of reconciliation. Or third, you could do something unprecedented. Create a new capital, somewhere neutral, somewhere that belongs to both kingdoms and neither. What would you choose?
Okay, I think I'd probably go with Upper Egypt. I know that sounds maybe not great, but here's my reasoning. You need a solid power base. You need your core supporters to feel secure. If you try to please everyone, you might end up pleasing no one.
I understand that, Ethan, but I disagree. If you rule from Upper Egypt, you're telling every Lower Egyptian that they lost, that they're subjects, not partners. You might win the war, but lose the peace. I'd choose Lower Egypt. Make the dramatic gesture. Show that this is truly a new beginning.
You're both making valid points. This is why I love history. Ethan, you're right that Narmer needed to maintain his power base. Celine, you're right that he needed to avoid making Lower Egypt feel subjugated. But there's a third consideration: practicality. Where can you actually govern both regions effectively?
Oh, location, location, location.
Like choosing Edinburgh rather than the far north or far south of Scotland.
Excellent parallel, Celine. Narmer chose the third option. He created a new city, Memphis, right at the geographical junction where Upper Egypt meets Lower Egypt. It's brilliant on multiple levels. First, it's practically positioned to govern both regions. You can move quickly north into the delta or south into the valley. Second, it's symbolically perfect. It doesn't favor either region. It's new. It belongs to the unified kingdom, not to the old divided world. And third, it allows Narmer to bury his ancestors in Abydos, maintaining his connection to Upper Egyptian tradition, whilst governing from a neutral space.
That's actually really smart.
It's political genius. You satisfy your base by honoring their traditions. You reassure the conquered by not rubbing victory in their faces, and you create a fresh start.
Exactly. And Memphis would remain one of Egypt's major cities for over 3,000 years. The decision to create it was one of the founding acts of Egyptian civilization. This decision had enormous consequences. It established the principle that Egypt was fundamentally the two lands united, both crowns, both traditions, both regions. It created a precedent for future pharaohs. For 3,000 years, Egyptian kings would wear the double crown. They would title themselves King of Upper and Lower Egypt. They would build monuments in both regions. And it worked. Egypt didn't fracture back into separate kingdoms for centuries. Remember I mentioned those lower Egyptian officials, the ones who chose cooperation over resistance? They don't have names we remember. We don't find grand monuments to them. But without them, Narmer's unification might have been a military victory, followed by centuries of instability.
They were the ones who actually made it work day to day.
Yes. Think about what they did. They had to take two completely different administrative systems and merge them. Different record-keeping methods, different ways of measuring land, different tax systems, different religious festivals. They had to train Upper Egyptian officials in delta agriculture, train Lower Egyptian officials in valley irrigation, create a unified system of titles and ranks, establish trade routes that served both regions. Narmer gets remembered. The Narmer palette immortalizes him. But these administrators, these officials who chose to build rather than destroy, they created the foundations that let Egyptian civilization flourish for 3 millennia.
And we don't even know their names?
We don't, but we should acknowledge them. Every time we marvel at the pyramids, every time we admire Egyptian art and architecture, every time we study 3,000 years of continuous civilization, we're seeing the legacy of people whose names are lost, but whose work endures.
The unsung heroes of unification.
Precisely. The unification of Egypt around 3100 BCE created one of the longest-lasting civilizations in human history. Let me put that in perspective. From Narmer's unification to Cleopatra's death is over 3,000 years. From Cleopatra to us is only 2,000 years. Egyptian civilization lasted longer than the entire history from Cleopatra until today.
That's incredible.
3,000 years of continuous culture.
And it all traces back to this moment, to Narmer's decision to create unified Egypt, to his choice of Memphis as capital, to those officials who made it work. From this unified state came hieroglyphic writing, monumental architecture like the pyramids, advanced mathematics and astronomy, sophisticated medicine, complex bureaucracy, long-distance trade networks. But more than specific inventions, Egypt created the template for what a territorial state could be: centralized government, professional bureaucracy, divine kingship. These concepts would spread across the ancient world.
And all of it depended on unification working.
All of it. If Narmer's unification had failed, if Egypt had remained divided or fractured after a few generations, we might never have seen the pyramids, never developed hieroglyphic writing, never created the sophisticated Egyptian civilization we know.
It kind of reminds me of any time countries unite, right? Like when different states came together to form bigger nations.
Excellent observation, Ethan. The challenges are remarkably similar across history. How do you create unity without erasing identity? How do you build institutions that serve diverse regions fairly? How do you create symbols and stories that everyone can embrace?
And the choice of capital matters. Look at Washington, D.C. in the United States, or Canberra in Australia, or Brasilia in Brazil, all created as neutral capitals, like Memphis.
Perfect examples, Celine. The same political logic Narmer used 5,000 years ago.
So Narmer kind of invented this whole concept?
He wasn't the only one. Similar processes were happening in Mesopotamia and China, but Egypt shows us the template in its clearest form. And it shows us that these early choices have consequences lasting thousands of years.
Here's something that still fascinates historians. We're not entirely certain that Narmer and Menes are the same person.
Wait, who's Menes?
Menes is the name ancient Egyptians themselves used for the founder of unified Egypt. It appears in later king lists, but the name Narmer appears on contemporary objects like the palette.
Some scholars think they're the same person with two names. Others think Menes might be Narmer's son. We're still debating this 5,000 years later.
And here's something even more remarkable. The hieroglyphic system that first appears on the Narmer palette, it continued to be used for over 3,000 years. Only Arabic script has lasted longer.
Wait, so if Narmer came back to life in Cleopatra's time, he could read the hieroglyphs?
Quite possibly, the script evolved, but the fundamental system remained recognizable. Imagine a writing system lasting 3 millennia. That's the legacy of the choices made in 3100 BCE.
And the Narmer palette itself has a fascinating modern history. It was discovered in 1898 by James Quibble and Frederick Green during excavations at Hyrcanopolis.
They found it in a deposit of sacred objects at the Temple of Horus, along with several other ceremonial items from the earliest dynastic period. It's been in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo ever since. And unlike Tutankhamun's gold mask, which has traveled to exhibitions worldwide, the Narmer palette has never been allowed to leave Egypt.
Why not?
It's considered too valuable, too irreplaceable. It's not just an artifact. It's the foundational document of Egyptian civilization, the birth certificate of one of humanity's greatest achievements, and their right to protect it. Some objects are simply too important to risk. So, what can we learn from Narmer's unification of Egypt 5,000 years ago?
That lasting unity requires more than military victory. It requires institutions, symbols, compromises, and people willing to build rather than destroy.
And that choosing a neutral capital can actually be really smart politics.
Both excellent points. I'd add one more. The choices we make in founding moments matter. Narmer's decision to create Memphis, to wear both crowns, to incorporate officials from both regions, these weren't just pragmatic decisions. They set the template for 3,000 years. Foundations matter. The decisions made when creating something new shape its entire future. So, what did we learn today?
We learned about the Narmer palette, that extraordinary piece of carved stone that gives us our first glimpse of unified Egypt.
We learned about King Narmer, who brought together Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BCE, and about his brilliant decision to create Memphis as a neutral capital.
We learned about the process of unification, not a single battle, but a complex transformation involving military conquest, diplomatic alliance, and administrative integration.
And we learned that some of the most important people in history, those officials who made unification actually work, are the ones whose names we've forgotten.
But we should remember them. Every achievement we attribute to ancient Egypt, every pyramid, every hieroglyphic text, every scientific advancement, built on the foundation those anonymous officials created. Remember the scribes. Remember the administrators. Remember the lower Egyptian officials who chose cooperation over resistance. They made civilization possible. You know, when I stood in front of the Narmer palette in Cairo, I teach ancient history. I've dedicated my life to this. I've seen countless artifacts. But the Narmer palette, there's something about looking at humanity's first attempt to record history, to say, this happened, and it was important, and it must be remembered. 5,000 years later, we're still looking at it, still learning from it, still marveling at what our ancestors achieved. That's the power of choices that echo through millennia.
And it all started on the banks of the Nile, when one man decided two kingdoms should become one.
And created something that lasted 3,000 years.
Exactly that. Until our next journey through time, keep history alive.